custody of the morality police for not wearing the proper hijab accordance with government standards. In the protest after Mahsa Amini's death, women demonstrators removed their hijab, burned their hijab, and cut their hair as acts of protest. The protest lasted for months and months under state's violent suppression. I would like to go 1 month back from this event and see what was the background, the immediate background of Women Life Freedom Movement. And then I will go further back. 1 month earlier, in July, a young woman named Sepide Rashno was arrested after footage of her objection to a state-connected woman harassing her on a bus over, quote, improper clothing was circulated online. She was taken to hospital with internal bleeding, which was a sign of torture shortly after her arrest. She appeared on IRB, Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran television on July 30th, wearing a headscarf, which she was against, to give an apology and a kind of forced confession. In the footage, Sepide Rashno's eyes, her face was pale, and she had dark circles around her eyes, which were, again, the sign of torture. A little bit more back into history, the Islamic Revolution in Iran happened in 1979. Before 1979, before the Islamic Revolution, there was no law that instructed women what to wear. The 1979 Islamic Revolution introduced the idea of hijab law. So there is this question of these years, the question of whether hijab for Iranian women is a sign of culture or a sign of religion or politics. Let us not forget that we are speaking about enforced hijab, compulsory hijab, the hijab that is enforced by law and by the police on women. If we consider hijab as a sign, in the modern era, hijab has been discussed many times from both traditional and political dimensions. From the traditional point of view, the hijab is a sign of following the Islamic commandments that a woman's body must be covered from a man's view in order to preserve religion and faith. From the political point of view, hijab is a symbol of political Islam, which became popular especially from the 1970s onwards, first in the Middle East countries such as Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq, Turkey, and Iran, and then in Western countries. From this point of view, the woman wearing hijab represents the Islamic society in the public space. Political hijab emphasizes distancing from Western culture. According to many religious intellectuals, when women today decide whether to wear hijab or not, it is not a simple matter of choosing a dress, but with this choice, they are actually deciding which world to place themselves in, the Western world or Islamic world. From this point of view, in addition to its religious meaning, hijab and Islamic clothing is considered to be a kind of distancing from Western women's lifestyle. Hijab as a symbol for the distant identity of the Muslim women rose in the 70s and 80s, along with the condemnation of the commodification of women, capitalism, and consumerism. It is during this time when Islamic revolution happens in Iran, and it is this socio-political atmosphere, in this socio-political atmosphere when hijab becomes compulsory in new established Islamic Republic of Iran. However, during the 1990s, the meaning of hijab went into more like transformation, which I do not enter that topic because I just wanted to provide a background, political background of, what hijab meant right after the revolution, and a little bit of like why many political parties did not resist against it. Also, a hijab by itself is a symbol of what happened to other dimensions of aspects of the status of women in Islamic Republic, like gender inequality, gender discrimination, and gender segregation. They all come with this enforcement of hijab. How did women resist? From the very beginning, many women objected against mandatory hijab. On March 8, 1979, thousands of Iranian women marched in the streets protesting the idea of imposing hijab. But those women did not receive enough support in the Islamic revolutionary atmosphere of the time. So hijab became obligatory for all Iranian women from April 1983. After Iran-Iraq war, that took almost a decade and pushed back civil political activities in Iran, gradually more and more campaigns were generated and practiced by Iranian women, such as the campaign of 1 million signature, and many campaigns during the last 2 decades, including, anti-hijab campaigns, including My Stealthy Freedom, White Wednesday, My Camera is My Weapon, and more. And then the revolutionary street girls started their actions, which was like for the first time, women started taking off their hijab right on the streets and standing on the podiums in the streets of different cities, and putting their scarves, usually white ones, in their hands, waving in air, or tying them to the sticks. And so the anti-hijab protest became more and more visible on the streets and public spaces in Iran, which were all violently suppressed. And many of these women have been imprisoned and are still in prison, many of them, and some of them are in exile now. It is important to mention that meanwhile, as we are moving forward in time, and we are getting closer to these last 2 years, no administration, including conservatives, Ahmadinejad, or reformists like Rouhani, made any considerable positive change in women's issues. Discrimination against women kept on at various aspects and levels, including family law, such as marriage, divorce, child custody, and heritage, economical aspects, such as employment and welfare, political aspects, such as women being like ministers and having political positions, public space freedom, such as entering stadiums, passport law, bicycle riding, etc. Many of these issues, like entering a stadium, became iconic and represented the battle between women and the patriarchal system in general. While women had some hope on reformists first and supported them for several administrative rounds, they became more and more disappointed by them, especially during Rouhani's term, when he promised women's rights against his promises and tried to hide behind the gesture of negotiations over the nuclear deal. Indeed, he promised women in his campaigns about, the women's rights, but after he was elected, Rouhani was elected, he did not make any positive change, and what he cared mostly and he was hiding behind was just negotiating over the nuclear deal. So there are signs of the end of hope to reformists were clearly seen in 2017 in January protests, which was almost the same time of the Act of the Revolution girls, and reached its peak in November 2019 protest. The main chant there was in Persian they said "Islah talab usulgara diye tamum majara," which means reformists, conservatives, it is over. Your time is over. So they were disappointed with both. Women played leading roles in these protests, and state media attempted to highlight this aspect of the protest as women leading also, but they condemned it. That they kind of like triggered men, that toxic masculinity part of society, as see the women are leading now. However, the society was supporting and following women leaders then until now. The 2021 presidential election was another proof of the end of any hope to either reformists or conservatives, because there was a meaningful drop in participation in voting by the whole society. Okay, now let's go back to summer 2022 when Mahsa Amini was arrested and murdered by the morality police. Again, just a few days before Mahsa Amini was arrested and murdered, dissatisfaction with the system and the confrontation of mostly women with the system was reflected and manifested in the way the morality police, called Gashte Ershad, attempted to control women and the way women played their roles. As a number of women's rights activists, here the picture is the picture of a mother who is standing in front of a morality police car, Gasht Ershad, when her daughter was arrested, again because of improper hijab, and they were taking her. And these mothers know that when their daughters are taken away from them in these kind of morality police cars, the daughters' lives, the women's lives are seriously in danger. This woman started crying and asking the morality police not to take her daughter, and she was repeatedly mentioning that my daughter is ill, please don't take her away. So yes, there is this threat for mothers now and parents these years that every day their daughter goes out, they are not sure if they are coming back safe and sound or not. And when Mahsa Amini was murdered, that nightmare that every mother and father was living with became actualized. Again, a few days before Mahsa Amini was murdered, well, I have my one leg in academia, another leg in activism. So I was involved with some of these campaigns, and my activist women, female activist friends, and I knew that the women in Iran are becoming more and more in danger as they are more and more getting into like brave battle and opposition to specifically hijab. As a number of women rights activists, including me, published in a statement on the days right before Sepideh Rashno was arrested and tortured. We mentioned, this was an open statement. We mentioned that women have been, Iranian women have been struggling against compulsory hijab since 1979. This is part of the statement. From the March 8 after 1979 revolution to regain, women, to regain their freedom in the streets, to the loss of jobs due to saying no to the mandatory hijab, to Homa Darabi's protests, self-immolation, to efforts to change the laws, such as the 1 million signature campaigns, efforts to raise awareness, efforts to rejecting the mandatory hijab and removing it in the streets individually, and in the hijab protest campaigns such as Masih Alinejad campaigns, to face encountering with the morality police patrols, and all kinds of creativity, courage, wisdom, and resistance, and resistance, and resistance. We were warning by this statement that they state that this is going too far, and the morality police is a real danger, and the system is now into, this system, the state is practicing a lot of like violence, state violence, and terror against Iranian women. Back to Mahsa Amini. This is when Mahsa Amini was arrested. This whole history was, I try to walk you to the moment when Mahsa Amini was arrested. This is when Sepideh Rashno's objection, struggle, arrest, torture, forced confession with tortured face happened. At this time, people, women and men, who were already dissatisfied with the whole political system and felt overwhelmed, humiliated, and threatened, observed a member of them, that is Mahsa Amini, is beaten up to death by the Islamic morality police. This is a time when the nation identifies itself with Mahsa Amini and unites against the corrupted dictatorship that has been torturing them for the whole 44 years of its existence. This is the time when women of all walks of life in Iran rise and announce enough is enough. And men from Kurdistan to Tehran, to Baluchistan, to Gilan and Mazandaran, to Lorestan, to Khorasan, to all four corners of the country stand along with women and chant death to the dictator, and chant, we do not want the Islamic Republic, we do not. And of course, the main slogan of the revolution, that is, Jen Jian Azadi, Zan Zendegi Azadi, women life freedom. The word woman in this slogan is uniting, and it goes beyond gender and sex. The word woman represents women from every walk of life, also LGBTQ plus community. And more visibility, the LGBTQ plus community had more visibility in this movement. It goes beyond sex and unites men who are anti-patriarchal ideology to the movement. And it becomes a word that various groups of people who feel oppressed or marginalized identify with. So women in this slogan becomes inclusive and makes a bound between women and men from one side and Iranian citizens from the center of Iran to the citizens from the other cities and border cities in Iran. And it transpasses to the Iranians in diaspora. In this picture, you can see that one of the first Iranian women who cut her hair as the protest against killing of Mahsa. Like a few weeks later, soccer player, a man, does this, performance in the field when he is playing soccer. He performs this act of cutting hair as a sign of solidarity with Iranian women. This is Iranian soccer player. So he shows like he's cutting his hair like Iranian women who are cutting their hair. Also, Iranians in diaspora. In the picture, you can see on the left, women in Canada are cutting their hair, Iranian women. On the right, you can see the picture of a rally in Berlin when like 60,000 Iranians gathered from different countries in Berlin to protest against, to show their solidarity with protesters in Iran and against the Islamic Republic. Also, many women from around the world showed their solidarity with Iranian women with cutting their hair, in Kurdistan, in France, in all different countries, and some progressive figures started speaking in solidarity with women protesters in Iran. I use this Foucault's panopticon symbol sometimes as how to see, analyze what is going on about hijab in Iran, like, this tower that Foucault explains, like there is this tower and the around the tower are some prisons, and this is like just symbolically when in the tower there are some guards, and the inmates think that they are always watched by the guards. And so it is just from the tower that the prisoners can be seen. The prisoner does not know when she or he is being watched. So he or she is always controlling, herself or himself, censoring themselves. And to me, when women started like not censoring themselves and not obeying the laws enforced hijab, it was like a fall of panopticon for them. It was like, okay, we do not follow, we are not scared of these guards if they are there or not, like the Gasht shot, which is sometimes there, sometimes not there, and most of the time, you know, for years, women were always checking their headscarf because they thought that maybe the morality police is somewhere around. But when they started thinking that, okay, we don't care, and they took off their hijab, it was, you know, the panopticon fell. And that is what the state is not happy with. Another point about what is happening in Iran is that, you know, like Sarah Meager is a scholar of violence in war and revolution. She explains a kind of state terror which happens not necessarily in war, but in uprisings and revolutions. This state terror includes this kind of state terror. It includes arrest, kidnapping, torturing, raping, and execution of the protesters. And all of this is happening in Iran. So we can recognize that what is happening in Iran is Iranian state is practicing state terror against Iranian protesters. It is arresting them, it is kidnapping them, it is torturing them, it is raping them, and it is executing them. So we have to recognize Iranian Islamic Republic of Iran as a terrorist state. And we should, you know, mention it, and we should name them as a terrorist state, because they are doing all the things that state terror includes, including shutting in the eyes of protesters. These are some of the pictures of some women protesters who lost their eyes in the protests. One of the ways that Iranian anti protest guards and police were doing was they deliberately shot into the eyes of the protesters, especially women protesters. And many women lost their eyes. However, this is how resilience is practiced by women and men, of course, protesters. Many of them mentioned that, you know, this is a quote from one of them, and many of them are bravely speaking like this. One of them says, "I lost an eye, but I gained a sight." So they are not you know, back, they do not get back from their protest. They are not scared and escaped from the from what they want, which is the news political system. Also recently, very recently, more and more students, female students in different cities in Iran are becoming chemically poisoned, which is most probably a systematic, another way of systematic suppression of women, Iranian women, because a huge part of protesters in Iran were women students, school students and college students. And now it has been for a few months, but recently, the very recent days, it is becoming more and more now, like more than 500 students, girl students, have been poisoned, and it is biological poisoning. It is chemical. It is like chemical weapon at the schools. And again, another resilience manifestation. Just yesterday, some male students, boys, started speaking for girl students, and they are announcing that either girls should be safe at the school, or if this is like what Taliban does in Afghanistan, for pushing girls back into their homes, and like Taliban, the policy is for the girls to get scared of going to school and sit at home. The boys now have started supporting girls, and they mentioned that either girls should be safe at the school, or we do not go to school either, in in solidarity with the girls. So I mean that for these two are the examples of like where the protesters are, where the power, the violent power is imposed on protesters. Exactly there, the protesters again rise up and show their bravery and their strong will of in the battle with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I would like to end my talk with this quote from Foucault that says, resistance like power is multiple, and it is formed right at the point where relations of power are exercised. So Iranian women rise from their ashes. This picture shows, on the left is when the first woman after Islamic Revolution went to the Olympic Games. She was, of course, forced to wear the whole hijab, and as you see, the covering is the color of the flag of Iran, and she is holding the flag of Islamic Republic of Iran. But a few days after Mahsa Amini was killed, and women life freedom uprising started. On the right, you can see the picture of Elnaz Rekabi, who was in Korea for a rock climbing competition. She had to wear a scarf, and she knew that if she didn't wear the scarf in the competitions, it will have some very serious consequences. But she removed her hijab, and she participated in the competition. She climbed the rock without hijab, and she showed that her free hair instead of the scarf, the compulsory hijab, is her flag in this revolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Parvana. We're going to go, we're a little bit slow here, so we're going to go just directly to Ilham, our next speaker, and then we'll take questions at the end. So great to have you, Ilham, with us. Ilham is a sociologist trained at UCLA, and her research focuses on nonviolent women's movements in the Middle East and North Africa. She is published in scholarly and mainstream journals. She has been teaching sociology at Santa Monica College for the past 22 years. And she is going to talk to us about women's movements in the region, and specifically Iran now, how they use nonviolent methods in their goals, their strategies and tactics, and the costs they pay for making social change. So Ilham, thank you so much, and
Sure.
it's over to you.
Hi. So you're gonna stop me when it's 15 minutes, right? Please.
Interrupt you.
Okay. So I'll go. Let's say it's 12:40. And I'll I'll stop at 12:55. Is
Thank
that
you.
good? Okay. Hi. Sorry, I'm at home, and you just saw my husband, so I'm gonna put the screen like this. I think all the details about the events and what have been going on in the past couple of months in Iran have been said by the last speaker. So I'm not going to talk about the events if that's okay with you all. But what I'm going to do is give a framework of how we as sociologists look at what's going on. And sociologists are usually 10 years behind everybody else when it comes to analyzing, but hopefully I can be a little more up to date. So in the region, in Middle East and North Africa, we've always had a nonviolent movements. And by nonviolent movement, I do not mean pacifism. We've had pacifism too, like when you say like Sohrab Sepehri's kind of a poetic movement in Iran, the poet who said, let's all stick to the nature and be a complete observer of how things are going and never interfere. No, nonviolent without any dashes or anything means that you take up a social movement, much like civil rights movement here, and many other examples around the world started with Gandhi in the modern era, for the independence of India and getting rid of colonialism. It's a movement that trains people to stand against state violence or cultural violence and be resilient. And by this resilient, and also through networking and other ways of advancing your goals, which is basically getting human rights for your group, legal rights, you advance. So you're not going to just stand there when they kill you. You're being killed or being tortured or being raped for a reason. And you're not showing, you're not killing people. You're not taking up arms and guns to kill the aggressor, not because you can't. It's because you have been trained in mind and in soul and in body not to use violence. So it's much different than an actual war that could go on, like a World War I or World War II or Vietnam, or, I have students who are veterans, and sometimes they tell me the women of Iran are such fighters. And I correct them respectfully and I say, no, they're not really taking up arms and killing the aggressor, but they have the kind of a discipline that you find in the army without the guns. And the reason they have it is not because time and time again, because if you look at the 100 years of the past 100 years in Iran, you see women have had uprising one after another. And it's not because they're bored. Well, sometimes they're bored too, because they're confined into their kitchen. And right behind me is a kitchen too, because of COVID and because of the years of teaching online. But most because they don't have legal rights, because they can't do what they want to do in their own space. Even if you, so if you go back to the mythologies and cultural traditions of Middle East, you find that women have always used their agency in two ways: their tongue and their use of time. So they voice their rights, they voice the lack of rights in our case, and from time and time again, they rise up because they find the opportunity to come up and say, yeah, in the middle of all these geopolitical things that are going on in the region, because the region and Iran is placed in such a precarious part of the Middle East, when the time comes, whenever the time is right, they rise up and they say, listen, we exist, even if you don't see us, even if you don't give us the legal rights that we want. So the goal in nonviolent movements and in women's movement in Iran is always inclusivity. And much like the politics of identity in the US and I think elsewhere, everywhere in the world, I always talk about Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality. It means that you're not always just a woman, or you're not always just a man. It depends very much on where you are, how you're being defined, by whom you're being defined, and the legal framework and the events that are going on. I think the last speaker talked about performative identity. That's kind of the concept that I'm referring to in a different sociological jargon. But we are never just a woman. You know, I myself came out of Iran in 1988, and I was tortured because I didn't have proper hijab and everything by one of the women who was in that same women's movement in March 8th that the last speaker talked about, that happened in the spring of revolution. She was at that time thinking that she is going for a great future. But you know, 10 years later, 9 years later, here she was torturing a younger woman because the younger woman was not in a, you know, in a cell, because she didn't want to accept that the young woman is now voicing her opposition to whatever she represents now. If you watch a documentary that talks about Masume Ebtekar, you'll see that she was educated in the West, and right here in the United States. She participated in the hostage crisis in the US, and now she's a minister, and she's got her kids all over the world, you know, studying, enjoying Western democracies and so forth. So it's never just a woman. It's never just a lower person. It's never just the Kurdish person. It depends on so many things here and there. So the goal has always been young women or women in general who feel like they don't have enough rights. They rise up and they say, we want our rights. I'm sorry if I repeat myself. In nonviolent movements, it's not always state against women, because we sometimes have this concept in our heads, and I think it comes from, you know, civil rights movement here, that it's the state against the minority. No, it's not like that. It's also culture. It's also, you can be a 68-year-old woman who participated in that March 8th women's movement, and yet 10 years later, you could be the oppressor yourself, because you're so embedded in that culture of patriarchy. And that culture, it's the patriarchy. It's so, it's more than law. It's just in everywhere in your house, in all the symbols. There is a sociologist, a French sociologist by the name of Bourdieu, who says power socially reproduces itself. And there is a symbolic power too, that always, that varies according to the time, event, geopolitics. Like, for instance, right now as we speak, Taliban has opened up its formal embassy in Tehran. And it's not because all the men or women who are in charge in Islamic Republic are, you know, Muslim with a vengeance. No, there are many good people in there too. It's because they have border security issues and they want to secure their border. So they've finally decided, Taliban, come in. Yes, we've had problems with you before, because the Hazaris used to kill the Shias, but now we need the border secured, so you come in. And they've started the conversation a year ago in 2021. And it's not only Iran, it's Qatar too, which is, I don't know how many of you guys travel to the Middle East. You think Qatar and Dubai, they're really nice. They're, they have this great culture, great places to visit, and tourism is nice and so forth. But these are people who are talking to Taliban right now. So, just like Hannah Arendt argued way back 60, 70 years ago with regard to Holocaust, there is no evil and good. The two overlap all the time. Because the people who put the Jews in the concentration camps weren't just evil. They were following orders and they were thinking about their priorities. It was, the priority was to obey the order of who they thought is going to give them advantages, is going to give them benefits. And they trusted that supreme leader at the time. And right now there's also people who trust because they need to trust, they need to feel security. Okay, so the goal, I talked about the goal. The second one in terms of nonviolent social movements is always strategies and tactics. In a region such as Middle East and where you have where Iran is and North Africa also, like Egypt and the countries that the last speaker talked about, strategies and tactics are very important. So strategies are overreaching rules and regulations that you go by, just like a war, but without the guns and without the killing and bloodshed. Tactics refer to little things that you do in every moment. So for instance, just like how they arrested me in 1988 because I was in a party that had mixed girls and boys together and so forth. They came in and they said, we arrest everybody and you're going to get lashes. And according to Islamic law at the time, because Islamic law is a very open text, like all religious texts, and it could be interpreted differently. At one time it could be 79 lashes, it could be 72 in 2 days. It depends on who reads and what they think it means. So when you get when the girls got those lashes and the boys got their lashes, and nobody ever talked about who got how many because we were so ashamed. The tactic refers to how you go on with your life. Do you then become spiteful, just like your enemy? Do you then become hateful? Do you then use the same language as your enemy? Or does that allow you to know your enemy better than they know themselves? And in the nonviolent movements, this is what it means. The tactics are how you go by on an everyday basis. So for instance, Armita Abbasi is one of those young women who has been taken in prison in Kachui, in Karaj, it's a suburb in Tehran. And she has been brutally raped. And it has been documented and so forth. And, she got out because there was interventions and so forth. And now she is posting images of herself exactly like before. Okay, so that's one tactic. One tactic is you go hide, which a lot of religious or ethnic minorities do. And, again, the definition of minority can change. It's not just ethnic or religious, or it could also be based on your activities. If you at one point in your life have said, oh, I like the exiled Shah in Washington or Virginia or wherever he lives, you can very well become a minority and be oppressed. But in this particular case of Armita, she wanted to show that nothing has changed. So that's one tactic, and it's quite acceptable in a nonviolent movement. Now, it raises a lot of suspicions, but people who are suspicious are always going to be suspicious. A lot of people started saying, oh, maybe she's the agent of the regime to begin with, just like how they branded Malcolm X in civil rights movement, and he started having his own non-violent movement, which was quite a violent movement, actually. But these are tactics. Now, strategies refer to how you build alliances. And fortunately or unfortunately, in the region like Iran, there's a lot of questions around who you build alliances with, because those alliances could very well be shattered. Or they could be shaken by earthquake, in this case, which just happened in Turkey, literally earthquake, or a political earthquake, like the Taliban opening up an office in Iran, which is, when you read about it, it's so surreal, because many people don't think that it can actually happen, but it is happening. So who do you build alliances with? Usually in like civil rights movement, or in the Gandhi's nonviolent movement, the protesters, the activists start making alliances with upper echelons of power, so that they can secure themselves and have powerful alliances. Well, in this case, they did it with Islah Taliban, the reformists. It wasn't very good. Now some are trying to do it with exile, with making transnational ties and diaspora communities outside. Many times it fails, because the countries where they reside might themselves be in perilous situation or contentious relationship with the Iranian regime. So, for instance, Germany doesn't want to risk any type of deals. And they're very, very cautious. Yes, they have a very nice record of human rights, and they did it, especially with Angela Merkel was there, who I dearly loved watching, because she was so humble. But then they also have economic interest in the Middle East, which they do not want to lose. Much like Taliban. Taliban has a lot of, Taliban and Iran, the political structures have a lot in common when it comes to mining, when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to feeding people. So why would they put that into any type of a risk? So the activists in Iran might want to ally with Germany or German politicians, but that's not always very secure. Now, the third part of the nonviolent movement is at what cost? And there's a cost we all pay for activism, and I'm sure there are many people right now in audience and among the speakers who are activists. But I've recently been asking myself, what's the cost, of this kind of an activism? Even for me, who's sitting here in California with two teenagers, I'm paying a cost, because they keep telling me, Mom, you act weird. Why don't you listen to us? Are you here? Do you know what we want? And it doesn't matter how much I spend. It's the emotional presence that they want. Now, in Iran, I think what's happening, and I'm just going to make this up right now, and I stand by it, even though it might be wrong. But I really think there's a femicide going on in Iran. I think it's not only state apparatus. It's the plain-clothed man. It's the older women who have become protectors of their families, lost identities or lost wealth, or because Iran has gone through many inflations during the past 42 years since the revolution. Then they've become so bitter, these women. So the cost, I think, is that these people that you could find in any layer of the society are not killing the young people. And it doesn't matter if they're young, if they're women or men, or they're just if they're beautiful and if they are full of life and if they know what they want and if they shout, because I realize there's an allergy to shouting in the Middle East. And if they shout their voice and if they want their rights, these forces allied with the state are going to want to kill them, suppress them, rape them, shoot them in the eye, and all sorts of horrible things. So, and that's the cost. Now, would nonviolent movement ever succeed? Because I don't want to end on a sad note. Yes, it does. It can, but it can come at a really high cost sometimes, and it can come sometimes by searching for ties, meaningful ties that you can build so that you can advance your goals. And those ties can crumble at any time, crumble, and you have to rise up again and make those ties again. And you have to accept the cost, which sometimes is high. Both, it could be high in terms of losing an eye, socially, emotionally, losing your supporters that you always thought are going to be your friends and always stick around and so forth. So the cost is high, but yes, it can happen. And now what can come afterwards? A lot of people think, oh, there's a utopia afterwards. Like it's gonna be wonderful. No, it's gonna be a very hectic democracy, just like India is. It's going to be always a struggle, but at least everybody will have a voice, and nobody can just go kill someone or take somebody's like somebody's money for no reason, or take somebody's property for no reason. There's going to be hopefully a rule of law that we sometimes experience, most of the time, I want to say, because I'm a proud citizen of the US, 90% of the time we experience right here in the United States. So the future is not Behesh Barim or the best possible utopia. It's going to be struggle after struggle and after struggle, and that's why protests always come in waves, and that's why activists always come in waves. And you have an activist at one point, and then she fades away or he fades away, and 10 years later rises up again, and so forth. But to think that it ends at any point is an illusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilham. You said some things that I really would love to respond to and engage in a conversation, but we do have one more speaker who I'm going to implore to be brief. But again, thank you, Damine Akavan has joined us. She has a long bio, but I'm going to shorten it and just talk about her professional career, which is in engineering, and a fellow of Engineers Canada. She's a Canadian Iranian with over 18 years of technical experience in the aerospace industry. She holds a Bachelor's of Engineering in Mechanical Engineering, a Bachelor of Science in Physics, and an MBA in International Business from the University of Victoria. And she's passionate about the advancement of women and other underrepresented groups in STEM, and has a founder and CEO of Global Women in STEM, Inc., which promotes human rights for women. And she's going to speak a little bit about that struggle for women in STEM in the context of the woman, life, freedom, and in the diaspora. So Damina, over to you, and thanks so much.
Yeah, I'll definitely be sticking to the time. Hi, my name is Damine Akavan, and I'm joining you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, also known as Vancouver, British Columbia. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that what I'm sharing with you is based purely on my personal experience as a girl growing up in Iran, and also my involvement with the current movement. I was born in the post-revolution pre-war Iran and spent my first 8 years during the Iran-Iraq War. As a little girl, my favorite activities during these turbulent and uncertain times were daydreaming in underground bunkers at school, going to the library with my grandmother, experimenting outdoors in nature, and staring at the beautiful Tehran night skies while my dad read me stories about life, our world, social issues, and humanity. That is when my love affair with science, everything space, and social justice started. This passion with science and space kind of manifested itself in various ways. And at different points, I had different career paths in mind. In grade 2, I wrote an essay outlining what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to be an astronomer to discover a habitable planet, an engineer to build a spacecraft, and an astronaut to fly all underprivileged people to my planet on the spacecraft. I was asked by the teacher to rewrite the essay because my career goals were not aligned with the others or suitable for women. Everybody else wanted to become a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, nothing wrong with that, but mine was just not suitable. Now, that's not what I was taught at home, so I took that comment very hard. I remember the next day, my father returned with me to school and reiterated to my teacher and school staff that I could do anything I put my mind into. That day and that moment set me up for who I am and what I do today. So from a very early age, there was clear clash and confusion between the culture at home and the environment for many of us. The 1979 revolution was not a choice in my household. My parents were professional musicians and very progressive. I knew I could do anything. I was surrounded by strong women. Becoming an engineer, a scientist, or a doctor was never questioned at home. But the oppressive environment was telling me otherwise. Whether it was having to be covered with Black and gray clothing at school, which, looking at the photos, quite traumatizing to me now, or being told that legally I'm worth half of what my brother and cousins were worth. My career ambitions, amongst other things, safety, resulted in my parents moving to Canada when I was 17 years old. Immigration was devastating, very difficult, a topic we can cover at another event. Now, fast forward, as Shelley mentioned, I hold a Bachelor of Engineering, a Bachelor of Science, and an MBA. I'm a professional engineer with over 18 years of technical experience in the aerospace industry. I'm also a founder and CEO of Global Women in STEM, and my business partner is also amongst you, where we promote equality, human rights for women and other equity-deserving groups, and most importantly, challenge the status quo in STEM through education, technology and innovation, advocacy, and action. Now, you might wonder why we would have to spend so much time and effort in promoting women's rights and gender equity here in North America for someone who has experienced living as a woman in Iran. After all, I already have a full-time career as a professional engineer. In the past 20 years, I have been involved with youth outreach and gender equity advocacy in STEM fields here in Canada, and have been working with many diverse organizations in different capacities, mainly to increase the number of women in engineering and sciences, something that wasn't really a concern for me growing up. As an immigrant woman in a male-dominated industry, I've always been the only woman at the table. I have faced many obstacles and setbacks. What I have realized is that we need as much attention to women's rights here in Canada as we do elsewhere. I must also admit that it has always been easier for me to stick to causes here at home due to the re-traumatization of having to rehash my experiences as an Iranian and the guilt and shame associated with leaving. But in the past few years, not anymore. What we are seeing with the revolution that is unfolding in Iran is the first time in history that women have been both the spark and the engine for a counter-revolution, trying to reverse the effects of the past 44 years. Here outside Iran, we have been attending protests, rallies, marches every weekend in the past 6 months. Most of us have had very difficult time living and enjoying our routines and working because of everything that is happening in Iran. What is worse is the lack of understanding and attention to this because of the notion that Iran has always been like this, full of conflict, lack of human rights, and what I call an uncool country. The silence from those in my industry has been deafening. What is worse is the silence of those who consider themselves women's rights advocates and human rights advocates here in my field of engineering and STEM. So what I've been doing in the past 3 years since the downing of flight PS752, when many of us Iranians here in Canada lost friends, family, and community members, and then these past 6 months since the death of Mahsa Amini, is sharing my experiences as a girl growing up in Iran, as a woman observing the trends and the potentials since we left Iran, and the statistics and cultural milestones when it comes to historical women's rights in Iran. I've been sharing the statistics around the culture of women in STEM in Iran, the treatment they received within the environment as a professional who lives and breathes in this field. In Iran, nearly 70% of university graduates in STEM are women. This is a higher percentage than in any other country. This is despite the fact that women's rights are severely restricted in Iran, as many of you know. Women in Iran were granted the right to vote in 1963 before women in Switzerland could vote. This is some of the simple information that I share in hopes that we'll realize that people, especially women in Iran, are fighting for is not isolated to Iran. We know that it is our human right to be free and equal in dignity and rights regardless of our gender. Women's rights are human rights. If it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. What has been happening in Iran in the past 44 years, the lack of human rights, the mismanagement of the ecosystem and wildlife, just to name a few, has resulted in the mass protests we are seeing right now. We are seeing girls in schools being poisoned and killed just to silence this woman-led movement. Reports of flooding that the regime is now gassing women-only dorms at universities. This is a systemic industrial scale targeting of women as retribution for this movement. We're seeing children and youth being murdered to deter us from fighting for equality. As a result, Iran was expelled from the UN Commission on the Status of Women because of this blatant discrimination towards women in law and practice. The irony and the sad reality is that I will be attending the commission next week, representing a Canadian civil society organization. As an Iranian immigrant and a citizen of this world, as someone who left a piece of my heart at the airport when the plane took off, I will continue to attend the rallies and use my voice to shed light on what is happening in Iran and amplify the voices of those who have been fighting for this fight for a long time. And I encourage all of you, Iranian or not, to be our voice and Iranians' voice for women, for life, and for freedom.
Thank you so much, Parvaneh. And I want to open it up to engagement from colleagues on screen and in the room. I think a lot of very provocative things have been said, and the experiences have been useful in thinking about how this movement came to be historically and what it stands for. Please open your mics. You can share your questions via chat or just raise your hand and speak. And for colleagues here, we have a group here in situ. I want to encourage you also to take a moment. Otherwise, I'm going to start asking questions. So, okay. Well, then I guess I will. I appreciate the focus here on the movement and the personal experiences, and the nonviolent resistance that is at the heart of this movement. But I did want to push you all a little bit on what we can do as responses. And I thought that Ilham did a good job of at least giving a name. The femicide name might not be the right name. And as many of you know, in the context of Afghanistan now, a lot of people are talking about gender persecution. So giving the crimes against humanity framework, a name, an identification of what's happening in a way that people can think about responses. Do you have thoughts about what are the kinds of responses that are needed to support the solidarity with the movement? What kind of gender apartheid? Great. So Dominique, I'll start you off, but what kinds of ways can we identify this movement and then think about advocating for specific responses, like Iran, being asked to leave the Commission on the Status of Women is one thing, but how do we talk about other types of accountability responses that move sort of beyond that formalistic type? Ideas.
I don't know who's speaking. I'm sorry. What's your name?
Oh, this is the moderator, because there was nobody else with a question, but I'm more than happy to stop once we get questions from those participating.
I think it's a good question, and I've always asked that from myself. So if you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have said, yes, it's any means possible. We should go through UN, and we should go through already established human rights organizations. But right now, at the age of 50 with 2 teenagers, I've come to realize that I've become a liberal with a little L, not a big L. So I've never been a part of any political group. I've been an observer and active participant, as the first speaker talked. So I've observed the transnational ties and so forth that have been forming in diaspora and so forth. But right now, I think the reason I said femicide is because it's very targeted killing and targeted torture of women. If you look, it's usually young men or women, and they are the ones who have courage to stand up. They chase them in the streets. Now, it could, well, when you are an analyst of Iran, unfortunately, you always look at Tehran, and there is no escape from that. But that's not where things happen. It happens in Kurdistan as well, in Lorestan, where there are, very, very courageous men and women who, by the way, do not sit down and cry and read Quran and whatever when somebody is killed. Like the Kurds, in the case of Kurds, they go on the grave of their son or daughter that has been killed by the security apparatus, and they dance. And there are these videos that you watch, and it's in a way maddening, because you think, how could you dance when your son has died 2 days ago, a day ago, or your daughter has died 2 days ago? But that's their culture, and their culture has given them this courage to stand up over and over and over again, because the Kurds are being suppressed, not by Iran only, it's also by Iraq, and it's also, in Syria, and because they share borders and they're not really a nation, and they don't have any natural resources, so they can't really form a state in the real meaning of the word. But that, and it also doesn't mean that the men who are dancing on the grave of that young person who has just died are all feminists, or the women who are dancing are all feminists. No, it's more complicated than that. It depends on a lot of other things, socioeconomic background and so forth. So to answer your question, I think if you want to save one person, you can, and you have to go and you have to become a full-fledged activist and make your own contacts and act on your own, which is a very lonely adventure that I think many others have taken upon ourselves, and it's very tiring. But at the moment, this is what it is, because to advocate for a group and to advocate for an ethnicity is not going to get you anywhere. Even for a religious minority. I come from a Jewish minority background, and a lot of times the Jews don't want to talk about, and most of the time I should say, don't want to talk about any type of rape or assault or torture that has happened, especially to their girls, especially, but also to their boys. And that prevents flow of information. Now, if they all have the same vision, then by joining the choir, they find the courage to gradually come out and voice their opinion, voice their suffering. It's only when there is a choir. Now, to imagine that this choir is united in every aspect of life is an illusion. They're not. And it has been proven many, many times over, because the same person who can join the choir can turn around and steal a retired teacher's salary in Iran because she lives outside of the Iran, and she thinks, oh, well, this is, if I can do it, I'll do it, even though she's been ethical 10 years ago, but she's not ethical now because she doesn't have, she like all of us, she wants to also send her kids outside and make them have beautiful lives and buy beautiful houses and so forth. I think accountability comes from documentation. And what we need is documenting in a very meticulous way every particular case. And then as a choir, when all those documentations gather, then we have a body of evidence that say, look, there is femicide, or look, there is suffering going on. Sorry if I talk too much.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. And really appreciate those thoughts. But I know Parvane and Domine have some things to add. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Just I have a list of what I suggest citizens of the world to do in support of Iranian protesters, especially women. Iranian women protesters in Women Life Freedom uprising were heard, and they were, people of the world paid attention to them for the first 2-3 months. But what I want to continue is continue hearing the voice of women in Iran, and men also. Do not get, tired. Do not get like, okay, this is getting too long. Do not get disappointed. Do not get too much scared. Do not get, just continue hearing their voice, please. Share your platforms and resources with them. Whatever platform and resource you have and you can share, do that. Stop and push back the regime lobby. The regime lobby, Islamic Republic of Iran has lobbies all around the world, especially like in the US, in Canada, in Europe. So stop and push back the regime lobby, because Iranians are fighting with them at the same time, but they don't have the resources. They are not, here in US, in Europe, and they expect us and the citizens of these countries to listen to them, to the people of Iran, rather than to the regime lobbies. Push your governments to stop negotiating with the Islamic Republic as a legitimate state. The state, as I mentioned, is a terrorist state. Do not legitimize it. Ask your governments not to behave with the state of Iran as if it is a legitimate, normal state. Ask international human rights organizations to use all their means to stop executions in Iran. This is very serious. Executing of protesters should not be tolerated at all. Acknowledge this is a revolution and support it in any means you have. And last but not least, this revolution is not just for Iranian women. It has messages with, for all people in the world, especially women of the world. So get inspired by women life freedom. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Wonderful list. Dominique, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to add, when you mentioned the movement, we are actually referring to it as a revolution, right? It is nothing short of a revolution. I myself never was involved in any of the movements that were happening in the past 40-something years because I just didn't align myself with having this regime reform itself or whoever else was coming from the regime. So it is a revolution. What has been happening is I'm not sure about the US. I know there's been still talks, government talks, unfortunately, with the government of Iran. But Canada has taken a pretty good stance of where we are in this. The members of the parliament, so on the federal side, and then the members of the legislative assembly on the provincial side, have been sitting with concerned residents. There are many Iranians living in Canada, and they've been voicing their concerns. So the members of the government have been listening, and they hold community talks. I've reached out to many of them on social media, have spoken with them, have invited them to the protest we're doing, and they are participating. What I think is everyone has been short of has been putting IRGC on a terrorist list. Because I think that will open the other doors, just like the UN Commission on the Status of Women, the expulsion from that basically took the platform from the Iranian regime. I think putting them on the terrorist list would also, but again, many countries, many Western countries and the countries around Iran are benefiting from this regime. And so, again, this time people want to revolt, but hopefully the governments in the area and Western governments will join.
Thanks so much. We have 4 more minutes for this panel. I want to just ask if anybody has any questions, any thoughts, reflections, comments from those on the Zoom. Okay. Thanks, Aiden. Wonderful. Aiden is getting to the microphone.
Hello, my name is Aiden Morningway. I'm a student at UD. I think it's more of a question for Elham. I think you touched on it earlier during your presentation. I was curious about, I don't know much about like intimately the culture in Syria, Iran, or Iraq, but amongst the multiple generations of women, how do you see the different generations of women reconciling like I want to call it a toxic relationship, but how do you prevent maybe the younger generation from becoming bitter or resentful as they get older, considering the environment they find themselves in, so that they can sort of keep this movement going, so that it didn't just become, a cycle of the young generation pursues this, endeavor, and then sort of their fervor dies out as they get older. How do you keep that going, and how do you think the culture will change in this region?
Thank you, Aidan. I think it's a nice question. It's a little bit of a utopian question, because if I knew the answer, I'd be very happy, but I'm not. the thing is, the culture, it takes a long time for a culture to change, and you could change the law, but that's only changing the facade, and it's all over, you know, like it's here too. You can find a wealthy man like Murdoch in the news murdering his wife and kid because he could, and he thought he could get away. So that's a part of a elite culture. In case of Iran, the women who, as they get older, they don't have much security, you know. The inflation in Iran makes the older kids, the first kid, usually the first daughter or the first boy, especially if he does get married, or even if he doesn't, to become the take carers of the older woman. And so the older women have no other choice but to become manipulative and to become a patriarch like you've never seen. So how do you change that? Well, there are economic factors. And then because I'm an educator, I believe in prevention. You know, my mom also was a principal of a school, so we believe in prevention. Educate people from the beginning. Make the woman go to school. If they're illiterate, make them read. Have them read, find resources, understand that they're not only limited to their oldest daughter or the oldest son when they get old. You know, there is a state, there is a group of local communities that they can go to when they get older. There is, you know, there's all these economic cushions for them, so they don't always fall on the shoulders of their sons or daughters, you know. So that's one thing, educate them. And then allow the older men and women to have, you know, in Iran, we call them shura, like a community council, the city council. Make the city councils powerful. So, you know, for a time in Iran, when the reformists were in place, they were able to have women participated in a lot of those city council elections, and they won places. That was a really nice time, you know, during Khatami era. It was very promising. And Rafsanjani, by the way, you know, he was an interesting character because he did horrible things, but he also did some interesting things. And one of the things that he did was to have free universities, for instance, opened it up to everybody. He said, you know, don't take this exam and use all the economic resources that your parents have or don't have in a lot of other cases. Or don't ask your uncle in America to send you money because you want to go to this prestigious university in Tehran. Listen, I open up free universities in every city of Iran, so you can go to free universities, kind of like next door right now if you're part of it, or TikTok that everybody watches, or, you know, technical schools that people go to, that they're not necessarily accredited, but they give some education, you know, and they make people somewhat independent. And that's nice, you know, that lessens the burden and allows women to feel a bit of financial security that would then bring emotional security for them, so they don't become these patriarchs that you just can't get rid of. So these are some thoughts, you know, and this has happened in Indonesia. You know, the guy who won the Nobel Peace Prize, the economist, if you remember years ago, that was his idea. He said, make women apply for loans and get loans so they can become independent, so they don't go around asking for you know, money and be dependent on others and so forth. So these are some ways. I'm sure there are others that your young minds will discover better than mine.
Ilham, thank you so much. And I know we've come to the end. It's just fascinating the way both here and everywhere the youth are becoming, and education is becoming the battleground for the rights discourse in a very specific and targeted way. So I want to thank all of you for your interventions and your experiences, your insights. It's fantastic to have the three of you with us. We wish you the very best. Please stay on. We do have one more panel. And I want to thank everybody who's joined. This has been a really rich conversation. And I know we here in the center really value the discussion around this really essential human rights movement going on in Iran and more broadly. So thanks again, and we will be back in 10 minutes, roughly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.